Welcome back, everyone. We now have a change in format of the sessions. From lectures and panel discussions, we are now moving to conversations. The first conversation is on open access, open research, the future of knowledge. May I request Dr. Garima Singh, Grants Advisor, India Alliance, to have the pleasure of introducing and engaging in conversation with Dr. Subbiah Arunachalam.
Thank you, Madan. As we celebrate 10 years of building excellence in research at India Alliance, it is important that we also discuss future of knowledge, which really lies in sharing knowledge openly. And this is what we are going to do today with our session with Dr. Arunachalam. His full name is Professor Subbiah Arunachalam. He is at DST Center of Policy Research at IISc. And he's been on several editorial boards. He started as a chemist, and then his passion moved into information science, where he did a lot of research using scientometrics to inform policy on how we do science. So I would like to start with asking, you have spent like 15 years advocating for open access, and much of your work has informed policy on our open access policies with DST and DBT. So please tell us more about some history with our discussion this morning that we, yeah.
Open access started with a man called Stephen Harnad in recent times. Stephen Harnad wrote a short note.
It's working.
Short note called Scholarly Skywriting, which was picked up by a man called Eugene Garfield, who was publishing what was called current contents. In those days, many scientists around the world did not have access to many journals. They would rather look at what is called current contents, where Dr. Garfield provided the contents pages of journals and the addresses of authors of those articles. And people will write to authors for reprints and so on. So this article of Harnad became quite famous, and later on, somewhere in the early 2000s, a number of people met at Budapest and decided to make things open in science and scholarship. And they thought about two ways of making scientific articles open. One was what was called through self-archiving. That is, an author, when he writes a paper, will place it in an archive which is available to anybody who has access to the net. The other is for the author to publish in a journal which is available in the open for anybody without subscription to read. So the first was called green open access, and the second was called gold open access. But as early as 1991, a person called Paul Ginsparg was working in the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, set up what is called archive to gather all the papers before they were published in physics, mostly in the area of what was then called particle physics and what is now called high energy physics and condensed matter physics, mathematical physics, and so on. And later on, they added mathematical biology, econometrics, economics, and so on. So that became even more famous in the sense, currently they have more than 1.4 million preprints in that archive. And I think every physicist in the world looks at it every morning. The first thing they do in the morning is to look at archive and look at the papers of their interest and comment on it. Open peer review, it is called. So this is how this movement started. When later on, it picked up momentum and others joined. After the Budapest movement, others joined. I will come to it a little later.
Yeah, so now that we are into open science for like 20 years, and India being such a small research ecosystem as compared to the global north maybe, how is it that we have not yet really jumped into making all knowledge accessible?
First of all, India is not really a small system. In fact, in the number of papers that we publish in reviewed and indexed journals, we are third in the world. China stands first, and with 1/4 of the world's papers being published by China, that is mainland China, not including Hong Kong and Taiwan and so on. And USA comes with 17%, and India is a distant third with around 7%. So we are the number 3 in the world in terms of number of papers published. So we are not a small system. Maybe we are not well recognized in the sense our papers are not well cited, as well cited as the US or the Western papers. Okay. Your question is about why, despite the fact that we have such a large scientific system, we are not yet making a big wave in open access. Yeah. To be frank, you are all the reasons, all of you here. So you don't care to place your papers openly accessible. So this is the problem, inertness of the scientists. The scientific community in this country is not really keen to make their work known to others. Second, our institutions, the directors, the government secretaries, and the chairman of the University Grants Commission, and so on, they are not really keen to enforce open access to India's science. See, we do have policy, for example. The DBT, the DST, CSIR, they all have policies for open access. But what is the use of having a policy unless you enforce the policy? Take, for instance, the Wellcome Trust in the UK and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They are latecomers to open access. They didn't begin with open access. But they have made it compulsory for those who receive funding from them to make their papers open. And as recently as about a week or 10 days ago, these two foundations announced that if you receive funding and we don't make it open, then they will have the right to stop you from applying for further grants, or even in the extreme cases, stop the ongoing grant. So there are clear policies of that kind. Unless we do have such policies, unless we do implement it with seriousness, this would never happen. So now, for example, DST and DBT have 32 institutions under them, 12 under one and 20 under the other. All of them were requested or mandated to set up repositories of their own a few years ago. In fact, I was on the committee which recommended this policy along with Shahid and a few others. And it was accepted by the secretaries of DBT and DST, and just a few months before that by CSIR as well. And that is a central repository which harvests all the institutional repositories located in Pune, called URDIP. These 3 repositories are called CSIR Central, DBT Central, and DST Central. Now, under the DBT, out of the 20 institutions, all put together, only a few of them are depositing papers. Only one of them have deposited about 800 papers. All the others are very nearly blank or a few hundred papers. So this is no way of implementing a policy. So this is the problem. The problem lies with the scientists themselves and the funding bodies. If these two people are willing to do things, it can happen. There's no need for breast beating. Why are you not doing? It's such a simple thing. Who prevents you from doing? Your hands are not tied. Go ahead and do. All the physicists are doing. Every physicist sends his paper to archive. What is our problem? Why can't others do? This is my question.
Yes, it's a very valid point that you have made. I would also like to know from you, what can be the role of host institutions like Indian Institute of Science or other universities to probably set up more robust mechanisms like repositories where people can easily put their publications in?
Okay, Indian Institute of Science cannot set a policy for everybody, but they can have a policy for themselves. They do have a repository of their own, set up by a small group some 10, 15 years ago, and that repository is reasonably well managed by a couple of people. Currently, they have more than 47,000 papers published in the last 10, 15 years. All of them are in the repository. And there is a problem with these open access repositories, especially for institutions like Indian Institute of Science, where the scientists publish, for whatever reason, I will not go into that, in journals published by many commercial publishers and leading society publishers like the American Chemical Society. These publishers, commercial as well as societies, have an embargo policy, which means if you publish a paper in one of their journals, you can't make it openly accessible to everybody immediately, and you have to wait for anywhere between 6 months to 2 years or whatever. So to overcome this difficulty, the Institute of Science has a thing called open access button. So this is an invention of Dr. Harsh Vardhan, about whom I talked in the beginning. So if someone receiving intimation of this repository and has a chance to look at one of the papers there, what we call the metadata, the title, author name, journal name, etc., he can click that button. Immediately, a notice will be generated at the Indian Institute of Science library. So one of the assistants in the library will look at it and gather a paper, a copy of that paper, which is legally possible to be sent to the person who requested it, without any violation of the copyright law. Of course, there are other things like Sci-Hub. Many of you must have heard or even used. There's a girl in Kazakhstan called Alexandra Elbakian, who is making the entire world's scientific literature easily accessible to anybody who wants it. But there are problems of law. And we will not go into that in an official meeting like this. That is for private conversation, not here. Okay? But this is entirely legal. What Institute of Science does is entirely legal, and they are making it available. And on a day, they receive close to 20, 25 requests for that through the button. So I think it is possible for every institute to do that. So there's no need for feeling that we are not able to do that. So your concern was, unlike other countries, we are not able to do that. I can assure you, if we make policies like what the Wellcome Trust and the Bill and Melinda Gates have done today, within a month I can show you results. Yeah.
So what really is stopping us from going there?
No, you are asking me, the wrong person. Ask them. Ask
Okay,
all
we
of
will
these
take
people.
that in the end.
Ask all of them. Ask our secretaries to the Government of India. Ask the directors of institutions. They have to do that, you know. Now, I have a request for all of you. Will you go back home and start doing it immediately? See, there's no point waiting for a good day or an auspicious vacation. These are things not done incrementally. This is a thing you have to do immediately, surgically. I mean, you can't wait for these things to happen. So right away, make all your papers openly accessible, right away. Persuade your directors or heads of your institutions to set up a repository with the help of your librarians. I mean, what you should do is to have a good conversation between the researchers and the librarians. So don't neglect your librarians. They are very knowledgeable people. They are not like the old day librarians. They are not there to just store books in shelves. They know a lot about computing. They know a lot about information access and so on. So take advantage of that knowledge and request them to set up these repositories for you. That is what we did at the Institute of Science. They set it up. In fact, we didn't request them. They did it on their own and came to us. So, I mean, this is possible. Please do that.
Could we go into a little bit of benefits of open access in terms of visibility?
Yeah.
Like as Indian researchers, we do not publish a lot more in Indian journals. And also, how can open access improve our visibility?
No, you're conflating two issues. Indian researchers publishing in our own journals is a separate issue. And I'm not very keen that we should publish only in our own journals. There are not enough good journals for all of us to publish, first of all. Okay, that is one. The second is to make it widely known. So we should be ready to do things which are necessary for papers to be widely known. Now, what is happening is we publish in journals around the world and we pay often what is called article publishing charges, which means the journal publisher gets money from the author or the author's institution, a fee for publishing the article, and then sells that very same journal through a subscription charge which he collects from the library. So for the same content, he charges twice, which we call double dipping, okay? Which is unfair. And this practice is now quite prevalent, and leading publishers are indulging in this. So there are two kinds of journals in the open access. One is the gold open access, which is all papers in the journal are open access. Like, for example, PLOS, the Public Library of Science Journals, the entire journal is open access. And the others are called hybrid open access journals. Commercial publishers publish commercial journals, and some articles are open access, for which you have to pay. Others are non-open access, for which you don't have to pay. All I am saying is, if you want to publish in those journals, don't pay publishing charges. Pay. You just publish and wait for whatever number of months and then make it available. Or you place the same paper, the version that is allowed to be placed in a repository. All the publisher says is you cannot place the published version or what is called the version of record in your repository. But you can publish the final author's version after the referees have seen and approved. That kind of version you can place in your repository. And that is the version you can send to anybody through publishers, through request button. So, I mean, all the facilities are there now, right now, to make knowledge freely accessible to anybody, anywhere, anytime. So without any delay. So it is only for us to take advantage of this.
And would you like to comment on how this can also improve? How can we work on our scientometrics, like all the APIs that are around by UGC?
Scientometrics gives you this API, for those of you who may not be familiar, especially our guest from England. It is for the evaluation of university faculty brought about by the University Grants Commission. They have some scoring system for each paper, this many marks, for number of citations, this many marks, for the number of conferences you organize, this many marks, and so on. And they add up, and then they give you a value. This they call API. So now what happens is, because they want you to write more papers and attend more conferences and host more conferences and so on, a number of people start writing what I may call poor quality papers, attend very poor quality conferences, just for the number, without any quality concern. And this only waters down the overall quality of research, and for nobody's good. So this entire system smacks of ridiculousness, I should say. So we should abandon this API system. That's the best solution. We should not use that at all. Now, for evaluation, we should have certain standards, okay? Then, for example, a few years ago, number of researchers and editors met somewhere in California and came up with what is called DORA. So that is for research assessment. They came up with a system. But in that system, I believe they have thrown the baby with the bathwater. They say you shouldn't use impact factor in any case. Well, impact factor has problems if you use for one individual or one paper and so on. But if you want to compare a large institution or a country as a whole and so on, it has tremendous value. For example, the US National Science Foundation and National Science Board, they have been producing what is called science and engineering indicators right from 1972, and it appears every 2 years. And they use the publication indicators, citation indicators, etc. And one whole chapter is devoted to that. Out of the 6 or 7 chapters, one chapter is devoted to this scientometric kind of studies. Then the European Union found it useful. They also produced science and engineering indicators for 2 years, but later on they stopped. OECD brings out a large number of STI indicators table year after year. And there are agencies such as Science Metrics in Ottawa, which are commissioned by European Commission or European Union to produce such reports. So all these institutions and nations do make use of this data. So there's no reason why we shouldn't use them in our country to our benefit. But all I can say is, if they have problems, as they really do, we should only make sure that we avoid those problems, we sidestep those problems, and we take what is good and leave what is not good. That's the way to proceed further. So API, in my opinion, is utterly useless, and it should be dispensed with right today. They shouldn't even wait for a day.
Thank you, Professor Arunachalam. Now I would like to open the session for any questions that anybody might have. We have some time for questions. This one.
While the mic reaches the audience, I just wanted to make a remark that for those of you who are not aware, that India Alliance has an open access policy, and as per the policy, any India Alliance funded work which has been accepted by peer review for publication has to be made open access as soon as possible, and in any event within 6 months of publication. And India Alliance very generously bears the reimbursement, bears the open access charges over and above the fellowship funds that has been approved by the committee. We have a question from Vinay.
So my question is, how legal are the preprints when it comes to publishing? Can a journal deny me the publication just because I've already put it in a preprint archive?
Okay. Not really. That used to be there. There was a principle called Ingelfinger principle. There was an editor called Mr. Ingelfinger, Dr. Ingelfinger, who was editor of New England Journal of Medicine. He told that if anybody has made available the knowledge that he is presenting in a paper ahead of sending it to the journal as a news report or to a press conference or even in his own company newspaper or a university newspaper and all, he will not accept that paper. So it was called the Ingelfinger rule, particularly in medical journals. But of late, especially after the physicists started doing this archive, and now bioarchive for biologists, and REPEC for economics and so on, I think it is slowly vanishing in all fields. So nobody will, not nobody, I mean almost any journal, almost, we can send papers and they will accept. And there will be very rarely, they may say, they may not accept, very rarely. So you can place your paper in a preprint archive and submit it to a journal later on.
So there's 2 benefits to open access via archives. So one is, of course, the access, and the second, which hasn't been touched upon, is the tremendous increase in the speed of science and the rate of the feedback one gets. So once one puts a paper out in the archive, the responses, there are people who start working on things that they read with you. So what the journals do is they actually hold papers hostage in time. It's not just the money. That's one point. But I have to correct you, sir. You said that you're allowed to place in the archive the post-review modified paper. That is actually not permitted by many journals even today. They're happy to post a version of yours prior to submission, but you cannot modify based on peer review comments of a particular journal, incorporate that. In certain journals, as of today, that is not permitted.
In most journals, what are called postprints. Postprints are the ones.
But not all. Not all journals.
Okay. So I stand corrected. Most journals do that. Okay.
Unfortunately, the society or the scientific society is moving to from publish or perish to publish and perish. A very bad system, because it is enormous pressure to publish rubbish. Okay, so that is creating a lot of even if you said PubMed, it is very difficult to find the right article you really want, because the number of junk is enormous. So because of the pressure to publish, the number of junk is going up and up. So that is, so in fact, can we do something to discourage publication?
Okay. So the point of publish and perish, published or perish, that has led to a very bad consequence for India. There is a publisher, I won't name, in Hyderabad, who publishes close to 1,000 journals. Not one of them indexed either in Web of Science or in Scopus. 1,000 journals, and also more than a few thousand conferences every year, and charging huge fees for participants. Because UGC wants all of you to list the API. I attended 3 conferences, I wrote 10 papers, and so on. So this is what we have done. So this is government-supported anti-science activity or immoral, unethical activity. So, I mean, we shouldn't be party to that. So this is what is happening now. There may be many other publishers. I'm quoting one example because the numbers are very large, 1,000 journals and several thousand conferences. It's a huge number. There are others doing 10, 15. They are chota players, minor players. So this is a huge player. And in fact, FTC, the Federal Trade Commission in USA, have sued this company for the past 2 years ago, but nothing is happening. The case is still on. On top of it, this company bought a company registered in Canada, and that company is now here. And when this company wanted to start some new activity of translating English language journals into Indian languages, one state chief minister and a central minister were present in that meeting. The photographs were flashed in newspapers in India. I felt so bad on that day. But what can individuals do? So this is what is up. We are all responsible for that. The academic community is responsible. Without us, we cannot survive. It is the academic community which gives him the scope to run such journals, to run such conferences. So, Professor Mehta.
My comment here, I actually have like a question and a comment together. So I'm from the medical fraternity, and there's a certain resistance to open access by the MCI, and one of the requirements for promotions in medical colleges is that you have to have your papers in print journals. So when they come for an inspection, the inspectors look at your papers and say, is this in open access or is this in print?
Yeah.
And then, it could affect our promotions, and it's kind of a serious issue for us who are involved, like, for example, with India Alliance, who requires open access and other things. So what would your suggestion to address the situation be?
Does MCA clearly say that if you publish in open access journals, you will be penalized?
It doesn't say you'll be penalized, but if you have to be promoted, you have to have 2 papers in print journals, the printed journals.
Printed journals?
Yes, you cannot have them in open access.
Yeah, I have written about it in one of my articles in, I do not remember now, I think it is in Indian Journal of Medical Ethics. I have written about this actually. In fact, I do not really consider publishing in journals as the best alternative for people who want to make their work open. I would rather go for the green access, which is make papers available through the repository route first. And that's my preference. And wherever possible, I mean, that's what we should do. And we should fight with MCI. We should clearly tell them this is not the way to do. And actually, I have the support of the editors of the IGME, like Sanjay Pai and Sunil Pandya and others. So when I wrote this article, I think Professor Tandon, our neuroscientist, so they are quite supportive of that article. And we should take it up with the MCI. If they don't change, I think we should fight with them.
Yeah. The MCI has dissolved. It's going to move into the NMC, but till the NMC takes over, it still exists. And it's likely that the policies just shift over, and the change to happen will take time. And then we are all in that phase of transition. And it does affect our careers to a large extent. So, I mean, you know, at least when the NMC makes new policies, if there are people here who can influence those policies, I mean, I think that would be fantastic.
We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Yes.
I just wanted to make a comment about how seriously fields outside biology, basic biology, life sciences, biomed take preprints. And so that's the example of one of the biggest breakthroughs in mathematics in the last 20, 30 years, which is the proof of the Poincaré conjecture by Perelman, an eccentric Russian mathematician. That still remains a preprint, but Perelman, on the strength of that preprint, was awarded both the Fields Medal, which is like the Nobel Prize in mathematics, as well as $1 million by the Clay Foundation. So if you want to get a Nobel Prize and $1 million, preprints is probably the way to go. Might be one conclusion of that particular.
We had a comment there at the back.
So you had touched upon scientometrics, and you also touched upon DORA. So many of us believe that using impact factors to project the success of your research is rubbish. But whenever I give that comment to many of my colleagues, the question that comes back is, what else can we use? So the answer to that is, read the abstract, read the paper, fine. But then the counter to that is, what about when there are large numbers? We're talking about the whole institute. So is there any work in scientometrics to replace the impact factor?
No, as I said, evaluation of individual papers and single individuals, etc., is a tricky thing, for which you have to necessarily follow these things. So what many universities in the West follow is request the individual to submit the 5 papers that he or she considers the best, and then based on that, they do this evaluation, which I think is a fair enough system. And also they go by a large number of reviewers. So for example, take for example NCBS in Bangalore or IISc, the 2 institutions about which I know. They get more than close to 10 or even more references for a candidate before he or she is appointed. So they go by references from persons who know this individual personally about his work, the quality of the work, and so on, which is a good system. But when I say you can use this citation analysis, impact factor, etc., when you compare large quantum of data. Recently, I did some work comparing the relative performance of China and India. And we found out, apart from the large difference in the total number of papers published, either as a whole or as individual branches, physics, chemistry, biology, or even sub-branches like organic chemistry, physical chemistry, and all the differences, apart, we found that in terms of citations, they outweigh us. In terms of the top 1 percentile of the highest cited papers, they do better. In terms of the top 10 percentile of highest cited papers, they outdo us. So I think there must be something. If in every parameter, if this is reflected, I think I should not neglect that. I should go by that. Okay? So this is my view. So, and many people, I mean, I'm not the only one in the world. I'm a small fry. There are large number of people are using that for much more important decision making around the world. Be it in Europe, be it in North America, they are using that. So it is not because nothing better is available, because this itself is inherently decent indicator. So when you say, I am using this because nothing better is available, that lowers its value. I am saying it's inherently good for some cases. Yeah. Oh, okay, they are linked together. The journal impact factor is based on the total number of citations of each article. So let us say there are 100 articles. Over a period of 2 years, all the citations, the 100 articles accumulate, and divided by this number of articles, the total number of citations divided by the number of articles, that is the impact factor for that journal. An impact factor is for the journal, not for an individual, not for an institution. So this confusion is a number of people in English class, they taught me transferred epithet. So they transfer this, from individual paper to individual scientist to individual institution. And so, I mean, that mistake we shouldn't do. Let us not go deep into that. I mean, that's not very important now. All I want is we should jump into open access as soon as we can. And we should not wait for incremental advances. We should be wholesale, and we should work together with the librarians. We should work with the funding agencies and the regulatory agencies. The regulatory agencies should formulate their principles and policies to accommodate this. The funding agencies should provide funding to support this. And for example, if I say everyone should place the paper in a repository, and there should be a central repository, I mean, somebody should pay some money to the person who manages it to set up the repository and so on. It's a peanuts, not a big money, but still somebody has to come forward to do that. So then once you provide the support, then they will do that.
Thank you very much, Professor Arunachalam, for being here today. And if you all have other questions, I'm sure he's around to take that later. We'll move on to the next session now.